Get ready for Hosts at Home. On today's show, it's a moment we've waited for a long time. Game show royalty joins us. Tic-Tac-Dough, Gambit, High Rollers, Bet. The list of shows he's fronted goes on and on and on. And so does his collection of colorful jackets. Wink Martindale is here. And now, here's your host, who interviews the host, Adam Wurtzel.
Thank you, Richard Malmus. What's up, everybody? I'm Adam Wurtzel. Welcome to Hosts at Home, the show where we chat with your favorite hosts, past, present, and future, because this man said this just before we went on. He said it's past, present, and future. There is nobody that is a bigger living legend, game show host, guru, whatever you want to call it, than this man. Hosted 18 different game shows, not including the ones that he produced, and he has invited us into his home. An honor to welcome Wink Martindale to Hosts at Home. Wink, so great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'm afraid to look up the word icon or game show, best of game show worlds, because I'm afraid I won't see my picture. It'll be a picture of Bob Barker or somebody else.
But Bob Barker hosted a lot less game shows than you did, my friend. I don't know if that means maybe you didn't keep a steady job, but you hosted 18 different game shows.
I could never hold a job.
Well, you did them all fantastic. Wink, it's so great to have you here. The first question that we always ask, of course, on Hosts at Home, tell us where we are. This beautiful home with a slot machine in it. Where's home for you?
Palm Desert, California. Yeah, right outside Palm Desert. We're 30 minutes from Palm Springs.
And you just recently moved here, correct?
2.5 years we've been here, and since we've been living here, Adam, I just love it. Sandy loves it, and if I had my life to live over, I think I'd have come here about 20 years ago.
Build all the studios right here in Palm Desert. Obviously, this show is very big with game show aficionados, as we call them, including myself. But before you were doing all that, you were on the radio. Tell us where you got your start, and was there anybody you were listening to at the time that made you say to yourself, I want to do this for a living?
When I was a little kid, I'd say 7 or 8 years old, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be on the radio. There was something fascinating to me that you could talk into a microphone and people could hear you on the other end of a radio speaker. And so I always knew what I wanted to do, and I worked toward that as best I could by training myself and teaching myself how to read and how to sell a commercial, that sort of thing. In fact, to give you an idea, my dad never made a lot of money. He was a lumber inspector in Jackson, Tennessee, and every Christmas he would get a crisp new $100 bill. That was his bonus. But he also received every Christmas a year's subscription to Life magazine. So as a kid, I grew up reading the pictorial Life magazine. And what I would do, I'd tear out the advertisement pages, and I'd go into the back room of our little 3-bedroom house there on Burkett Street in Jackson, close the door, and pretend I was on the radio. I would ad-lib a commercial around those pages from Life magazine. And that helped me later in life to learn how to read, and also, hopefully, to learn how to sell. Now, much later, my Sunday school teacher, Chick Wingate, was also the manager of the little 250 water there in Jackson, Tennessee, and that's where he gave me my first job in radio. And I remember, every little town has its court square, and me and some other buddies of mine were sitting on the railing of the court square at First National Bank building there one summer night, and up comes Chick in his little Henry J automobile. You're too young to remember Henry J's. But he got out of his car, and once again I said to him what I always said to him every time I saw Chick: when you going to give me a job? When are you going to put me on the radio? He said, damn it, come on up. So we went up to the 4th floor of the bank building where WPLI was located. He ripped off some news copy, gave me a couple of commercials to read, and I went through them like Grant going through Richmond. I mean, I was ready for this. And I told him the story about how I used to practice in the bedroom using Life magazine. And he said, look, that was really good. You come down here tomorrow after school, and I was a senior, just getting 2 weeks hence was going to graduate from high school. And he said, you come down here tomorrow, I'll have the mayor here. Mayor Smith owned the radio station. And if he likes you as much as I like you, you're going to get a job. So sure enough, I couldn't wait for school to be out the next day. Got on my bicycle, came down to WPLI, rushed upstairs. He put me in front of the same microphone with the same news copy, the same commercials. I went through them again, just like that. And Mayor Smith was impressed, and he gave me a job, and it was my first job in radio at $25 a week. And now I'm up to 45.
That's amazing. Well, inflation makes sense. I read your book, which you had sent me a copy of.
Winking at Life.
Thank you again for that.
You're welcome.
And really, I think the whole theme of this book is, and in your life, is persistence is key. And I want to make sure I'm remembering this right. Did you work at like a malt shop and a drugstore by day, and then you were doing like an overnight shift at night and all that?
Well, all the Martindales, as we grew up, all the Martindales worked at Baker's Drugstore for our dear, dear, long departed friend Alfred Baker. We were soda jerks, and we all worked there, my sister and my 3 brothers. And at the same time, I was a soda jerk at Baker's. I was also a delivery guy for the local newspaper, the Jackson Sun. I delivered papers every afternoon. And in addition to that, I was doing those 2 jobs when I got my job at WPLI. So actually, there was a period of time when I had 3 jobs at the same time, and I was bringing down about all 3 jobs were paying me about $85 a week. Now that may not sound like a lot of money, but to a kid who was about 19 years old, that was pretty darn good. And I remember taking a little bit of money every week and putting it in a Christmas Club savings account, so that at Christmas time I'd get a check for like $50 to buy Christmas gifts. But that was my comeuppance in Jackson, Tennessee, and the way I got started in this crazy world of show business.
What was the Memphis music scene like
boy.
back then when you were on the radio?
I feel so blessed, Adam, to have been a part of the music scene in Memphis during the decade of the 50s, because as you probably know, that's when rock and roll really started. And I was at WHBQ Radio the night Elvis Presley was discovered. I was one of 6 people still living who were there that night. That's All Right Mama was played for the first time. And that sort of kicked off what came to be known as the rock era.
How'd you get to LA? How'd you get to LA from Memphis?
Well, in 1959, I'd been in Memphis for 7 years, and I went to my boss, Bill Grumbles, and I asked for a transfer. WHBQ Radio owned several stations, KHJ in Los Angeles, and a station, WOR in New York. But I didn't want to go to New York, so I asked to be transferred by RKO to Los Angeles. And so I got my transfer, came out here in March of 1959.
Meeting Elvis, being friends with Elvis for so many years, did he ever watch any of your game shows?
Yes, he did. He watched Tic-Tac-Dough on a fairly regular basis when available to watch television. We never really talked a lot about game shows that I was hosting other than that one. But yeah, I can proudly say that he watched at least that one game show. And I'm proud to say that I was the first person hosting a show that Elvis ever appeared on. I was doing a show in Memphis. I was sort of the Dick Clark of Memphis in the mid-50s, and doing an American Bandstand type show on Saturday for Coca-Cola for an hour and a half, and it was called Top 10 Dance Party. And because I had met Elvis at WHBQ Radio back in 1954, when he finished his first movie, Love Me Tender, in LA and came back to Memphis, I asked him, with a little prodding by some friends like Dewey Phillips and George Klein, DJ friend of mine, to come on my show. And sure enough, he did. It was the first filmed interview that was ever done with Elvis Presley. It lasted about a half hour. And of course, he was as big as baked bread and getting bigger every day. I mean, everybody was pulling at him from all sides. So I felt very fortunate to have the opportunity to interview him on my show. As a matter of fact, I had so many questions I wanted to ask, you know, in the limited time I had. I remember I made cue cards, and I put cue cards all over the wall with questions that I didn't want to forget. And I remember one time I was asking one of the questions, looking over the shoulder, reading the question, and waiting for his answer. He looked around and he said, well, why don't you just look up there and see what the answer is?
It's funny.
He gave me away.
That's how I feel about you. And I don't always prepare questions, but I do today because I have so much I want to ask you. I always try to kind of pull some obscurities from your career out of the vault, should we say. So we're going to talk about something. I want everybody at home to take a look at this.
Michael Shaw, 45, husband, father, is an astrophysicist.
How about chicken salad? Cheese omelet?
Cheeseburger, some French fries, and a nice cold bottle of beer.
I'll see.
Well, there's a 3D and 4D, you know. What's next?
What's next? You never know. You never really know.
So this was shot in 1967, but Wink, you were partying like it was 1999 in this futuristic, what it's going to be like in the future film. What was that, and how did it all come about?
Well, it came about, my agent got me the job, and I don't remember a lot about it other than so much of the future that we showed in this movie actually came true. I remember one specific thing. It was before credit cards. And, you know, we said, you know, there'll come a day when we won't use cash for paying for items. We'll use plastic credit cards. And sure enough, that happened. But that was typical of what that show was all about. What is it going to be like 20 years from now? And it was an interesting project for me. And it's interesting you ask about it because I still have friends who remember that show, I guess because the very nature of the show, ask me about it all the time.
It was cool. I love watching
Thank
it.
you.
And it's on YouTube if everybody at home wants to watch. Speaking of future, your future, of course, is in game shows. Let's go back to your radio days. Were you watching game shows at the time? Was there any shows that you watched, any hosts that you looked up to from the 50s and 60s?
Yeah, my favorite game show host of all time, which I'm asked about from time to time, is the late, great Bill Cullen. He was so good, and he was so, he had such a great sense of humor, and he made the show, whatever he was doing, move along at a rapid pace. He kept it going, and he was just the very best. And another person that I admired greatly and had the chance to meet later was Art Linkletter. He was terrific. And there are other people like Peter Marshall, who did Hollywood Squares all those years. I could name a lot of guys like Alex Trebek. He was another favorite of mine. The guy who does Wheel of Fortune, Pat Sajak, Vanna White. I had so many favorites, I guess because they were so doggone good. So I kind of tried to build my career around those people and the way they did what they did so well.
Let's talk about the first game show you ever did. Not even talking about the format or the show, what was very interesting to me was that you weren't Wink Martindale, you were Win.
And here's the star of the show, Wink Martindale.
Why?
Well, to give you a little background, the first game show I ever did was a local show in Los Angeles called What's the Name of That Song? It was sort of a name that tune type of song. The orchestra the band would play a song, and then you'd have to sing the first two lines of the chorus without making a mistake. The deal the producers had with NBC was if it became successful locally, then it would move to the network, NBC. Well, sure enough, it became successful at night on Channel 5 in LA. And we went on the air, I think it was 1966, and it only lasted a year. And it was called What's This Song? And the reason my name was changed to Win Martindale, However, I've always thought that'd be a good name for a game show host, Wink Martindale. But the reason they call me Win, the guys in New York who make the big bucks for making the big decisions, one of them, Bob Aaron, who was head of daytime at NBC, thought Wink was too juvenile sounding. So he said, we'll knock the K off and he'll be Win. So for that 1 year on What's This Song, they shortened the title from the local show, What's the Name of that song, to fit in TV Guide. So it became What's This Song? And it lasted a year, but it got me started in the world of game shows. And then from there, I just went from one to the other.
Wow. As long as the check clears.
That's right.
So many of the shows that you hosted back in those early days, Can You Top This, Words and Music, even Gambit, which is one of the most legendary shows, the recordings don't exist anymore. What was with the tape, going over the tapes and they're just being gone? Why?
I think that there was a period of time in the 50s and even in the early 60s when networks wanted to save money wherever they could, so they would take shows that they didn't particularly care about putting on the shelf any longer, and they would reuse those tapes. Now you look back on it and you think, what a stupid thing to do. But it's what happened, and it's what happened to a lot of shows like my Gambit show.
Yeah. I've got a stat here, speaking of Gambit. So, we're taping this interview September 10th, 2022. We're not live? What? Shocker. Exactly 50 years ago, last week, September 4th, 1972, Gambit premiered on CBS alongside The Joker's Wild and what was called The New Price is Right.
Right.
With Bob Barker. What do you remember about hosting Gambit, being at Television City in those early days, and that day where all three of those shows premiered?
Well, that was, I think back on it now, Adam, as you ask me this question, and I still feel an urgent need to be excited, because I was so excited, as a kid growing up, watching not only game shows, but just watching CBS television, NBC television, ABC television. But especially CBS was the prime network. I always thought CBS was the zenith. And here I was, I had won the competition to be host of Gambit. It was produced by Merrill Heater and Bob Quigley, Heater Quigley Productions.
Legends.
And they also produced Peter Marshall's, show. And I know for sure that they auditioned practically everybody in this city of Los Angeles. And even Dick Clark was auditioned. But somehow, some way, I was the one who got the job. So I was so proud of that, and so proud of the fact that I was not only premiering on CBS on that particular day, but with two other iconic figures in the world of television, Bob Barker and The New Price is Right, and Jack Barry of Barry and Enright Productions, and Joker's Wild. So I remember going on the air that day, and I remember watching at home, and we had some friends come over, and we were so excited about Gambit being kicked off on CBS that we had a bunch of friends over, and we even at 10 o'clock in the morning had a little glass of the vino.
My kind of guy, everybody. My kind of guy.
And Gambit wasn't a huge hit, but it lasted about 5 years on CBS. And I remember Bob Noah, the producer of the show, line producer, came to me one day and he said, "Gee, I just saw the new show that came on opposite us on NBC." And I said, "Yeah, I saw it too." And I said, "No, we have nothing to worry about." And Bob said, "Nuh-uh, don't ever say that, because a lot of times that'll kick you in the rear every time you say it." So sure enough, this show called Wheel of Fortune started knocking points off of our ratings, which had been great for 5 years. And eventually, the daytime Wheel of Fortune on NBC was the reason Gambit got canceled on CBS.
Wow.
But we got to do Las Vegas Gambit later at the Tropicana Hotel. So that was fun too.
I love that. We will talk about Las Vegas Gambit from Television City in Hollywood. So many shows said that at the top of the show. Legendary announcers like Charlie O'Donnell and Johnny Gilbert. Bring me in to Television City in Hollywood when legendary shows like Gambit and Price is Right and Match Game and Tattletales and all these shows are taping in those very incredible years in the 70s. Who did you see in the hallways? Who did you see walking around?
Well, it's amazing. The person that I remember seeing as I was leaving after taping some Gambit shows one night, in walks Jerry Lewis.
Wow.
I don't know why Jerry Lewis was coming to CBS at that time of the evening, but that always, remained in my head. It was very special. But, all of us used to tape on stages that were adjacent to one another. So we would, I would have the opportunity to go into a dressing room and sit down and chat with Bob Barker or whomever, and that was very special. It was just, as you said, a very special time in the world of game shows.
It really was. 1978, your next game show for CBS, later syndication, of course, Tic-Tac-Dough.
From Hollywood, it's everybody's game of strategy, knowledge, and fun. It's Tic-Tac-Dough. And now, here's our host, Wink Martindale.
Do you consider Tic-Tac-Dough to be the quintessential Wink Martindale game show?
Without question, yeah. I got used to those checks coming in on a regular basis. And I did that for about, 7 or 8 years. And it is the game show that most people relate to me when they think about game shows. And I was always lucky to have a name like Wink. It was unusual as a host. But Tic-Tac-Dough was, I think, successful because it was such a simple game. Everybody knew how to play. You get 3 X's or 3 O's vertically, horizontally, or diagonally. If you do that, you win. And of course, we were very lucky because when we went on the air the very first year, we had a fella come on. He was a lieutenant in the Navy in San Diego. And one of our first real big winners, his name was Tom McKee. And he stayed on for about, 40 some odd days, and he won like $340,000 or $50,000, which at that time was huge. And because he was, a big winner in that first season, naturally that brought people in to watch our show and test it, And so we became, I think that one of the reasons that helped us to become so successful and have such a long run.
Do you ever talk to past contestants after the fact? Have you heard from Tom or any other contestants?
Yeah, I've kept in touch with Tom. Tom's the only guy that I've kept in touch with. And Sandy and I still see him from time to time when he and his wife Jenny come out here. I remember asking Dan Enright, who said that he was the quintessential game show contestant. And I said, Dan, why? Why was he so special? And Dan said, well, because he wore the uniform of the country. He was a lieutenant in the Navy, San Diego. He had a beautiful wife. Her name was Jenny. And she sat in the audience for every show that we taped of Tic-Tac-Dough. And not only was she pretty, but she was also pregnant at the time.
Casting dream. A casting dream.
Yes. And, of course, Tom was a good-looking guy. So he was, that's what Dan told me. That's why he was the quintessential contestant.
What was the deal on Tic-Tac-Dough? I remember you wearing hats at the end of the show. People would send in hats.
So I'm going to put this on. And it probably is an award winner. Don't you agree? We'll see you next time.
What was the whole...
I don't know how it began, but I do know that a viewer, an avid viewer, sent me a couple of hats in the mail, and one of them had my name on it. He had put my name, Wink, on it. And so I remember wearing that on a show as we completed tapings on a Friday. And the reaction was so great that that's the reason on Friday's show I always ended up wearing a hat. And I got all these hats. I mean, it was unbelievable the number of hats I got. And I kept them for a lot of years in my garage. And then we needed the space, and so I finally got rid of them all. I think I don't know what we did with them, but that's the way it started. I wish I had a better story, but that's it.
Well, you look good in hats. That's what we found out. The final season of Tic-Tac-Dough, of that incarnation, was hosted by a guy named Jim Caldwell. Why'd you leave?
Well, I left because I got lucky, and I came up with an idea, which I sold to Merv Griffin, first time he'd ever bought a show outside of his own production company. It was called Headline Chasers.
If it was news and you know it, you'll win some heavy cash on Headline Chasers. And now here's our headliner, Wink Martindale.
And I wanted to host that, and I couldn't do, at that time, you couldn't host, 2 shows at the same time. So it was either do Headline Chasers or continue to do Tic-Tac-Dough. And we were in the waning days of Tic-Tac-Dough. It only lasted 2 or 3 more years. And so I went to Dan Enright and asked if he would give me my release from the show so that I could do my own show. And he understood that. And so that's how I happened to leave the show and do Headline Chasers.
Not the only show you produced. You went to Canada. Bumper Stumpers, The Last Word, Second Honeymoon. How did the deal in Canada come about?
Well, it was a good place to tape because you could go there and you could tape shows for a lot less money. So your budget wouldn't have to be nearly as big. So we did shows, the ones you mentioned, like The Last Word, we taped in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And I had the pleasure of producing that and also hosting it. And Bumper Stumpers, I believe we did that one in Toronto. And I didn't host that, but Bumper Stumpers was an idea, a creative idea, I think, because that's when license plates, everybody was buying personal license plates or getting them from the state, putting them on their car. And I remember pulling up behind cars and seeing a personalized and trying to figure out what it said. And I thought to myself one day, that would make a good game show. So sure enough, it did, and it lasted 2 or 3 seasons. And I was always very proud of that show because it was fun to play.
And it was one of my favorites, as much as I love Tic-Tac-Dough, and it is your iconic show, wasn't my favorite, Wink, High Rollers.
Now a game of high stakes, where every decision is a gamble and every move could be your last. High Rollers!
That was my favorite show.
Oh, the big dice.
The big dice, and I have so many memories of you hosting that show, the big numbers. What are your memories?
Well, as you probably know, I was not the first host to host High Rollers. That was Alex Trebek. I was the last one to host. I guess I killed it. I was the last, and it was, I remember we taped it at CBS, but it was not on CBS. It was for syndication, first run syndication. And I just loved the show, and I always thought that it deserved a much longer run. You take the dice, you throw them, and whatever numbers came up on the dice, you would see those numbers over here, and you'd knock off those numbers. And the quicker you could knock off the numbers by throwing the dice, the better. If you got rid of all of the numbers, then you won. If not, then you moved on to another game with another contestant.
That show was very, I don't know if it was on purpose, but for me as a kid watching it was very educational because it helped teach me math. Because you had to figure out, okay, you got a 9, I'll take the 4 and the 3. It helped me.
And I wasn't able to come up with those numbers real fast. So I remember that one of the producers kept them on cue cards for me. Okay, these are the numbers that are left. You have to get this, you have to get that. Because I just, I was never good with math. So I had to have help on that. But it was very creative, and I just love that show. And we gave away some fantastic prizes and beautiful trips around the world on that show.
The thing that I remember the most about that show, and maybe this is because I couldn't answer trivia questions when I was watching the show at a young age, was not only the lights and the sounds and the buzzers, but it was the dice table that would bring the dice back to you without you having to physically go and give it back. Was there like a man with a crank underneath the dice table?
No, it was just a little button that I would push, and that would bring the table back.
That was you pushing it?
Yeah, I did that myself. That way I could do it whenever I wanted. In other words, if I wanted to ad-lib for a minute or so before I brought the dice back for the next roll. But I was the one who actually did that, yeah.
That just blew my
But
mind.
I think that's a funny idea.
That just...
The fact that somebody would be under the...
I don't know, maybe there's a man just... I don't know, that's so funny. You did it yourself?
Yeah.
I would have never known that. Throughout the 90s, you were hosting these game shows that were interactive. Trivial Pursuit, Boggle, Shuffle. They were way ahead of its time. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. My partner in those days, when we were producing those shows, was the late Bill Hillier. He was a terrific guy and a terrific guy when it came to creating game shows. And in those days, we got lucky at that particular time because the Family Channel back east wanted to start a series of game shows every day, and we created a number of game shows, most of which you mentioned, around what was the show that we built it around?
The first, I think, was Trivial Pursuit, and then you ended up having a few other ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever think about being a game show host?
Sure. Call me.
It was Trivial Pursuit, and then we had Trivial Pursuit would come on like at noon, and then followed that would be another show and another show, so that their whole midday was taken up with game shows. And Pat Robertson, who was head of the Family Channel in those days, and Tim Robertson, we had a close working relationship, and it meant a lot to me because it helped buy my house.
You were kind of creating Game Show Network before Game Show Network ever existed.
That's right. That's right.
The show that I think, well, all of your shows connect. I mean, good television connects with a home audience, but the one that I think connects the most with the average American is Dead.
Drowning in a sea of bills.
Then it's time to play Debt. The game show where 3 debt-laden Americans just like you compete to have us pay off all their bills and go home with nothing. And now, let's meet today's contestant.
How'd Debt come about?
Debt is one of my all-time favorite shows. And again, one of those shows that I think deserved a longer run.
Absolutely.
Debt is a show where we paid off young people's credit cards up to $10,000. And Michael Davies, who is now the executive producer of Jeopardy, was my producer in those days. And I remember getting called over to Disney, the Disney studios one day, to see a guy named Michael Davies. I'd never heard of him. And so I went over there, and he told me about this show called Debt, and it appealed to me. And we went through some, we played the game, you know, with actual audiences. We rehearsed for 2 or 3 days, and we all saw that it worked. It was a game show that worked. And so it did extremely well. The first year it was a huge success, but the colors that we used on the set were the same colors as in the credit cards.
There was some credit card. Is it Visa?
Visa card, I believe, yeah.
MasterCard?
It was either Visa card or MasterCard. And they sued us for using their colors. And so the second season, we had to change, all of that. And it never did seem to have that magic of that first season. So it lasted about 3 years and then went off the air. But it was a terrific show. It was fast-paced.
I hadn't heard that credit card companies own the color red. He's got to take it off. We're going to get sued. We're going to get sued. What was with the disco pose?
The Duke of Death, Wink Martindale.
Thank you.
What was with that opening pose?
That was the time when John Travolta was so popular, and Michael Davies thought it was a terrific idea, to put me in silhouette before it opens up and be in the John Travolta pose. And so no more, no less, that was it. And it seemed to catch on, so we just kept doing it.
That sound you just heard, that means it is time for the lightning round. Wink, you did hear the sound, right?
Of course I did.
Fantastic sound.
It scared me.
I apologize. I apologize for that. This is the lightning round. It's very simple. I'm going to name a show that you hosted, a show that you were involved with. All you have to do is tell me the first thing that comes to your head. Maybe it's a story, maybe it's an anecdote, anything you want. Are you up for the challenge?
I'll try.
Here we go. First up, The Great Getaway Game.
The Great Getaway Game was a huge failure. It was done in New York, and it lasted about 10 minutes. That's what I have to say about The Great Getaway Game. But I remember the producer and the creator was a wonderful human being named Dick Brockway. And I haven't seen him in years. I don't know whether he's still with us on the planet. But it was fun to do because I got to go to New York and spend good time there, taping the shows.
A little vacation with your wife, Sandy, and all that.
Yeah.
It was a huge failure. I wasn't expecting that. How about a show called Instant Recall?
Instant Recall is one that it was the last show that I did for the Game Show Network. And Instant Recall was one of those shows where something was created, you watched it, whether it be funny or serious or whatever, and then it would end and you'd bring the contestants in and they would you would ask them questions about what they remember about that show. Again, not a very successful show and not very creative.
Well, this one I've seen, and I think it's so creative, and it was a pilot. Tell us about Top Secret.
Top Secret was a show that I created with a partner of mine, Jerry Gilden was his name, Martindale Gilden Productions, and a friend that you and I know, Bob Bowden, was part of the daytime executive offices of CBS in those days with Michael Brockman. He worked under Michael Brockman. And Michael and Bob Bowden ordered a pilot on Top Secret. And we did the pilot. I hosted it. And we had great hopes that it would get on the air, but CBS never saw fit to air it. But it's still, I think, a terrific format. And naturally, I would think so, but I think it was a terrific show.
And you can hear the theme song in the beginning of all the videos that you post on Wink's YouTube channel.
That's right.
This one is the second version of Gambit, Las Vegas Gambit.
Done at the Tropicana Hotel. We had a tremendous amount of fun. We combined the upfront game with the high rollers game as the bonus game, and they both seemed to work real well together. And we did it in the big showroom there at the Tropicana. I loved doing it. And we would go in every weekend, fly in, do some shows, and then fly home. We'd go back every weekend and tape shows at the Tropicana. So it was a big kick to see my name on the marquee in front of the Tropicana. That was worth the price of admission right there.
This one is, we're going to call it a Wink Martindale deep cut, Dream Girl of 67.
Dream Girl 67 was a tough show to do because I had to look at all these beautiful young ladies every day. And they were, that was only lasted a year, and then I left to do another show at ABC called Everybody's Talking. But Dream Girl 67 was obviously in 1967, and it involved young ladies, 17, 18 years old, and it was some sort of a competition. And naturally, I was kidding when I said it's a tough show to do. Loved it.
And finally, the last word.
The last word was a good word game, but and it was created by Merrill Heater and Bob Quigley, and we did that in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I had the joy of hosting it, and it was a good word game. It just never took off.
Wink, so many people love your entire career. I mean, every aspect, and you've been in very high demand to be on this show. So first off, thank you for doing it. Thank you for inviting us into your home. And we have some viewers that have some really good questions that they want to know about.
Okay.
All right. And the first one, so two people asked the exact same question. This is from Cam Dennis from Arlington, Texas, and Alex Zerl from Philadelphia.
Okay.
And they want to know, what's your favorite game show you hosted? And what's your least favorite game show you hosted?
My favorite game show would be the one that lasted the longest, and I would have to say that would be Tic-Tac-Dough. My least favorite show would have to be one that I did for Chuck Barris called How's Your Mother-in-Law?
All right. Glad you didn't say Host at Home. Kevron Harris from Cope, South Carolina. Do you think Det deserves more recognition and a possible reboot?
I think Det deserves a reboot without question, whether I would be the host or not, because it had so many good elements. It was one of the best game shows that I certainly ever had anything to do with, and one that I enjoyed hosting as much or more than any others.
I love this next question. It's from Brian Schwartz from Philly. Have you kept any props from the shows that you've hosted?
Glad you asked that. I happen to have a prop right here. This is a deck of cards that we used on Gambit.
Wow.
Naturally, they had to be larger than just regular playing cards. And Merrill Heater's wife, Elaine Stewart, was the gal who handled the cards. And, I would ask a question of, we had two teams of players, usually husband-wife. I'd ask a question. They would answer the question. They got it right, they would get the card, and they had the right to either take the card or pass it. Sometimes you could hit 21. Naturally, that's an automatic win. Sometimes you could give a card away and bust somebody else and win as a result of them going busted. But that's what this is. This is a...
Wow. They're in fantastic condition, by the way.
The best, yeah, they're like brand new. Yeah.
Wow. And is this a card from the show? This fell out of the, which I didn't even see before the show. This fell out.
I don't know what that is. It says Gambit, so it must have something to do with this.
And what is that? Well, I know it's a tissue box.
Oh, yeah, this is a tissue. A listener, a viewer, sent this to me, and it says Wink Tic-Tac-Dough, and it holds Kleenex, and it's one of the nicer little gifts that I ever received. It's amazing how many people sent in little items over the years, and I kept some. Naturally, I didn't keep the others.
Not just the hats. You got sent tissue boxes as well.
There you go.
Aaron Wolf from New York. This is the last one. We know you have an extensive radio background, but do you play any musical instruments?
No, I don't. I never played. I always wished that, in looking back over my life, that since rockabilly and rock and roll became so big, I always wanted to play a guitar. If not a guitar, a piano. But I never, I guess either when I was younger, I either didn't have the time or the interest at that time. But I always wished that I had later in life.
Is there a show from the past, or maybe one that's on right now, that you wish you would have hosted?
Yes.
Which one?
Jeopardy.
Oh, you would have been great.
I think it's the best show that's ever been created. I'll give you the answer, and you give me the question. I mean, how do you beat that?
You don't.
That's just terrific.
Tell everybody what you're up to nowadays here in beautiful Palm Desert. I know you recently had a radio show happen.
Yeah, I do a radio show every day on a radio station here, KWXY, and I'm on from 1 to 3, and I I build my radio shows Monday, Wednesday, and Friday around past interviews that I've done over the years. I've interviewed just about everybody you can think of, and I kept those interviews, I had them digitized, and I build them and bring them sort of up to date and surround them with music. And I'm happy to say that the show has done extremely well, and people have taken to it. And then on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, in that same time period, I do a show called The History of Rock and Roll, which I've been doing for years and years. It's heard around the world, and it's well written and a well produced show that tells the history of rock and roll. And each show is themed. Like, one show might be the hits of 1972. The next show might be the hits of the 50s, that sort of thing.
This has been so incredible. Wink, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Adam.
Wink, of course, not the only game show legend. We've got interviews with Bob Eubanks, Jim McCrell, Chuck Woolery, Mark Summers. The list goes on and on.
I've never heard of any of those people.
I've never heard of them either, but they all said yes to the interview. If you like what you see, please hit subscribe and watch our other interviews. Wink Martindale has been our guest. My name's Adam Wurtzel. As you know by now, I don't close the show. That's this man's job. Wink, over to you.
I want to thank you for being with us. I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. I hope it's been interesting to you. And perhaps you've learned something about yours truly, and maybe even about Adam that you didn't know. Thank you so much. And Adam Wurtzel, thank you for having me.